So today's program is part of our 2024 Climate Smart Forestry program. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. And just share that, as many of you know, I know many of you have participated in other programs as part of the series. This series really offers a whole range of different webinars and woodwalks that's focused on a range of different climate-focused topics. And so our topic for today is talking about healthy woodland streams through strategic woody additions, or as the title slide says here, the power of strategic woody additions. So I'm really pleased to have our co-presenters join me today. We have Dave Wilcox, who is the Watershed Forester with Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation, and Shayne Jaquith, who is the Watershed Restoration Program Manager with the Nature Conservancy. So again, that's the quick overview of our program today. As many of you know, this is really an evolving topic, and both Shayne and Dave bring a range of different experience and expertise to the conversation. So I will go ahead and turn things over to Dave to introduce himself and get the presentation underway. So you should be able to share your screen now, Dave.
Okay, I have unmuted myself. I am sharing my screen. Let me know when you can see that. Can you see that, Kate?
Yeah, looks good, Dave.
Okay, excellent. Well, thanks everybody for being here. My name is Dave Wilcox. I'm the Watershed Forester with the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And I just wanted to give a quick overview of what is the Watershed Forestry Program at FPR. And as you can see on the screen here, we do lots of different things. There's a list in the middle of some of the highlights that we do. There's always more behind the scenes that we do, but primarily A&P tech assistance and compliance. We work with loggers a lot and foresters to ensure that water quality practices get implemented on the ground and that folks know what those rules are. We do a lot of education and outreach for loggers and foresters. We also have a bridge cost share program and a rental program. And the Watershed Forestry Program does a lot of work as well with the agency land that is managed out of the Department of Forest and Parks, and helping them implement clean water projects. So there's a lot that we do here, and very happy to partnership with VWA on this this webinar and others as well. So wanted to give a brief overview. You know, what are the clean water principles that we work with every day, whether it's you know, bridges or A&P work or working with loggers or foresters. The clean water principles are the same things, just over and over in different settings. So disconnecting roads and trails, infiltrating storm water, stabilizing the conveyances where that water is dissipated, essentially spreading water back out so that our trails and roads that accumulate water can disperse that water back out on the landscape. And then as well, you know, we talk about forest buffers. They're very important. And then, of course, properly sizing stream crossings. That's where a lot of our effort goes to, on agency land, as well as working with private landowners and foresters. Now, the A&Ps, most people have heard of the A&Ps. Some states call them BMPs, but in Vermont, our acceptable management practices are 26 practices that help do just what I talked about in the previous slide, to protect water quality, minimize stream impacts, prevent soil erosion, and they're applied on all places on the landscape relative to logging operations, both prior to, during, and after harvesting. And I bring that up because you know, that's kind of our textbook, so to speak, for what we do. And I wanted to tie that in, and you'll see shortly how that ties in with the 12 steps for climate resilience and managing your forest with climate change in mind. There's the 12 steps, obviously. You know, you need to understand where you're working, your woods, getting professional help, because we don't all have the answers and understand what's going on. And I enjoy getting out in the woods with anybody, because I always learn something. You know, a licensed forester can provide a lot of benefits to landowners that they may not even understand, or know to ask about, I guess, not understand, but understand you don't know what you don't know. And then obviously identifying vulnerabilities, dealing with water slowing and spreading, like we talked about, protecting soils and water quality overall in general, is very important to keeping that ecosystem healthy and resilient, and working on regeneration. All of these things are very important over time, the long term. Creating complexity, which I think, you know, Shayne will talk about relative to streams, but a complex ecosystem with a lot of complexity is more resilient, and in dealing with stressors. Increasing deadwood for lots of different reasons. Managing other stressors, insect disease, that sort of thing, invasive plants. All of that goes into resilience. Adapted species. We know that the climate is changing and the ranges are shifting. So keeping in mind what may do better here in the future, and what may not. You know, kind of gearing that towards the species that will do the best down the road. And then, as always, protect the rare, unique, and important, and then monitor and reevaluate. So that's a quick rundown through the 12 steps. And I wanted to just highlight that two of those are specifically for water, but or water quality, but there are others in there that Shayne's going to touch on today. So the AMP manual that I talked about, or well, I haven't talked about the manual yet, but the AMPs include a few rules that are a little bit contradictory to what strategic wood additions is all about. And essentially, you know, Vermont has a rule that it's illegal to discharge any waste into waters of the state without a permit. And in the case of the AMPs, if a logger is following the AMPs properly, that essentially is their permit to do what they're doing, and they have the compliance assumption of compliance, that they're following the water quality laws. So AMP 6.5.1 says streams and all waters shall be kept free of logging slash and logging debris. And you're going to see that Shayne is going to talk about just the opposite of that, and how do we add slash, and I wouldn't call it logging debris because it's not a result of logging, but debris captures a lot of different things. And so in order to do strategic wood additions, it requires a permit from the state of Vermont, from the stream alteration engineers. And that I get asked all the time by loggers, that if we want to add wood to streams, then why do we make them pull it out when the trees get felled across the stream and they limb the branches off, or they knock trees down in the stream? And that's because what they're doing is not strategic. There's no assessment of that stream, whether it needs it or not. And it's random. It's not with a goal in mind. So, and not to mention that, but and you'll see what Shayne's going to talk about with strategic wood addition. It's the large part of the tree that gets left in the stream. That's the part the logger wants to take. It's not the brush and the tops of the trees. So there are a couple other AMPs regarding the forest buffer that just to highlight real quickly. A forest buffer shall be left along stream, so we can't remove more than a certain amount of the buffer. We want to have shade. We want to have 60 to 70% canopy closure. And with strategic wood additions, not enough trees are cut to ever reduce that shade below that certain amount. But it's worth talking about, just so we know that the AMPs protect the forest buffer. And then logging equipment is not permitted to be driven in the 25-foot buffer or the 25 feet immediately next to the stream unless it's has to do with a crossing. So those are the buffer guidelines relative to the AMPs. And the AMP manual is available in print form, or it's also available as an app. And you can see the website here, or call me or email me, and I can send you a copy of the printed manual, or you can take a picture of the screen right now, and you can go to the website or and get the app right off the internet for free. The app has the manual on it. It has a clinometer function, which allows you to get the slope of skid trails and the forest buffer to make sure that you're following the proper distances for things. And it also has a contacts, so you can get a hold of anybody at any time. And if you're in a connected environment where you have cell coverage, those links are live in the app, and you can really get a hold of or find out more information. The websites in the app, it's in the manual itself, are all a lot searchable. So I also wanted to let folks know that we're going to have a site visit and a tour of some strategic wood addition practices on the U.S. Forest Service land down in Rochester. That's going to be on June 8th. We're going to meet from 9 until noon. We're going to meet right at the ranger station at 99 Ranger Road. And we're going to see 2 examples of strategic wood additions. And if anybody has any questions about that, we'll be hiking moderately to get, through the woods to look at the first site. So there will be some walking and that sort of thing. If you can, please carpool, because there's not always good parking. But if anybody has any questions on that, please give Kate or I a call. We can answer your questions there. So that's all I have. I couldn't see my clock, so I don't know if how long.
Yeah, great. And Dave, while we switch gears to Shayne, I'll just reiterate, just follow up on a couple of those resources that you shared. One, I put a link in the chat box to the 12 Steps document. So that is a publication that we produced, VWA produced in collaboration with UVM Extension. And so, like Dave mentioned, it's a great resource. Encourage folks to check it out, and you should be able to access it if you haven't seen it already using that link in the chat box. And then I also did put a link into the AMPs. And I'll put a link in for registration for that walk on June 8th in just a minute. So thanks, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Kate.
Great. And so we're going to shift gears a little bit. As Dave mentioned, this is kind of an evolving concept in some respects, but I know, the state of Vermont, we do have quite a bit of experience, and I'm excited to have Shayne join us today to talk a little bit about his work and the work of others in the state that have been introducing this idea of strategic woody additions in ways to promote healthy streams. So Shayne, I'll go ahead and just turn it over to you and let you share your presentation. And Shayne, I think you're muted still, so we want to hear you. So if you can unmute yourself.
How's that?
Much better. There we go.
All right. And you are seeing my first slide, I believe.
Your slides look great. Yep, you're up and running.
Okay. Great. All right, so thank you, Kate, VWA, and Dave and the department. We're really excited to be able to continue to share what we've learned about strategic wood addition. We are in the process, I think, as a community of practice of river restorationists, trying to really build out the implementation of strategic wood addition. I've been in this field since 1998. And that's the river management and restoration field. And I really am excited about strategic wood addition. It's something that's been utilized since, well, it's been utilized since probably the 1800s, really, but in its current sort of form, going back to probably the mid 80s, when folks started putting whole trees into streams and documenting the outcomes of that. So excited to share this all with you. Again, I'm a river restoration scientist or a river scientist and manager of the Watershed Restoration Program with the Nature Conservancy. And I do want to mention that a lot of slides and images of these slides were provided by Judd Kratzer, who's a fisheries biologist with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. And Judd and the department have really been leaders in Vermont over the last 12 years, really pushing wood addition. So I just wanted to thank him for the contribution of slides and images that I'll share. Okay, so I can't advance the slide with my keyboard. So let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the interconnected history of rivers and forests, just to get a little bit at why it's important to have trees, not only alongside our rivers, but also in the rivers. So if we look back at the evolution of Earth over geologic time, we see that before trees, the Earth's rivers, and this is sort of the bottom panel in this image, we see that the life in rivers was very limited early on, and the rivers themselves were these braided channels with islands of loose gravel that moved around a lot and really didn't provide very good habitat. But over the course of what is referred to as the Devonian period, which is about 365 million years ago, vegetation began to emerge, and these highly mobile gravel bars started to stabilize, and you got the establishment of different features in the river channels that were more stable and suitable for habitat, and fishes really began to thrive. The Devonian is often referred to as the age of fishes. So we get the development of we get vegetation establishing that stabilizes the river channels, and we really see an explosion of fish. And by the late Devonian, we have full forest cover on the landscape, and the fish population has just gone through the roof by this time relative to what it was prior to vegetation. So the whole point is that rivers, forests, and fish all evolve together, and they're completely interdependent. Additionally, more recently, there continues to be work about showing that not only do forests shape the rivers, but in turn, rivers actually shape the forests. And if you look at the upper panel there, where we find these single thread meandering channels, we get a forest composition or structure that looks like it does to the left of that image of that sinuous channel. Where you have really younger age class trees right next to the channel. And as you move away from the channel, the trees get older. That's because the channel's continuously moving back and forth across the valley, taking out trees. And as it moves in one direction, the trees start to grow behind it. And so those trees are younger than the trees further away from the channel. That's in real significant contrast to channels that are really dominated by wood within the channel. And these pieces of wood form anchors on which gravel deposits and trees grow. And that landscape's really stabilized, and you get sort of these multi-thread channels through that forest. And you can see the difference in the forest structure. We get a much older, continuously older forest as we move across the valley from side to side. So again, just the real interconnectedness of rivers and trees and how they influence each other. So, prior to European colonization, European settlement, we had, rivers moving through a landscape covered by, really old forest, and we had a lot of large wood on the forest floor and in our river channels, pushing the rivers around, slowing water down, having all kinds of influence. And then we had European settlement, and European settlement was really hard on forests. I think we all have a pretty good understanding of that. It was also really hard on rivers. Settlement began really with the fur trade, and as the trappers came through and extirpated beavers, that had a huge influence on rivers because prior to that time, it's estimated that there had been about 67 beavers per square mile and one dam every 25 to 100 yards along our river channels. So our rivers were really more a series of wetlands connected by short channels. So very dramatic impacts. Of course, we had the clearing of our rivers, the removal of all of the thousands of years of dead wood that had fallen into our river channels to facilitate log drives. We had those log drives, which had themselves a large impact on the river channels. You can imagine those logs moving down at very high speed and how much impact they had on the banks and the bed and just physical manipulation to our river systems. And we had things like the constructions of splash dams, and splash dams were built to facilitate log drives. These dams would be constructed to create large pools. Logs would be placed in those large pools, and when deemed at the right time, those splash dam gates would be flung open, and all that water and wood would travel down these streams. So all of this activity had huge impacts on our rivers, not to mention the deforestation of the state and how that altered the timing and the volume of rainfall and precipitation, snow melt, and sediment that made its way to our river channels. So this image comes from a conference in Maine, and it just sort of encapsulates all of that, just showing that 14,000 years ago to about 12,000 years ago, we had all of this, we had glacial retreat, we had tundra vegetation within forest, we had Native Americans on the landscape. And then from about 20,000 years ago until about 260 years ago, we had riparian buffers developing into old growth forests, and we had natural forest succession, we had large boulders and woody debris in our streams. And then about 260 years ago, and this slide is particular to the Machias River in Maine, but I think the same holds true throughout New England. We had log drives starting, and that just changed everything. And that change is shown in this slide by the strike through, the red strike through. So no old growth forest. We lost our large woody debris. We lost the log jams and our dynamic river system. So again, just a lot of impact associated with the European colonization. So with that understanding of the history of rivers and wood and the loss of wood from our rivers associated with European settlement, just want to move to what the role of in-stream wood is in our streams. Why is it important that it's there? So if we look at that image on the left, we can see a stream that is really lacking in wood. It's got a very flat bed from side to side. There's no deep pools. There's no steeper riffles. There's no cover for fish. It's really lacking in almost all sort of habitat features. And if we look to the lower right of that picture with the image with the words riffle and glide and cascade and pools, those are different types of features that we find. Pools being deep, glides being shallow with slow water, riffles being steeper with faster water. And all of those different features provide habitats for different fish species, different insect species that the fish, of course, eat. That wood provides cover. So that's the real important, that's a importance of wood, is just the in-stream habitat. And the top image sort of in the center there, you can see a couple logs, and those logs are actually placed as part of a wood addition project. And you can see the deep pool that's downstream of that one log. The water flows over that log and scours the pool. And then that image in the bottom right, this is one from Judd Kratzer at Fish and Wildlife. You can see how that jam that they installed forces the water to flow underneath it and the large scour pool that it has formed underneath it. So that is all great habitat for fish, those deep pools, particularly with wood over them to protect them from overhead predation from birds and other critters that might, hunt from overhead. So a lot of the importance of large wood in creating habitat. Then there's the role of wood and actually slowing water, causing that water to get deeper in the channels when it backs it up and forcing it out onto the floodplain where it slows down, it interacts with the soils and the vegetation on the floodplain. And these are two images from wood addition projects that the Department of Fish and Wildlife did up on the Nullhegan. They've been doing work up there for about 12 years now. And these are a couple images from those, a couple of those sites. But you can see the water spreading out. You can see how slow it is moving. And then on the right, these plots show research, one study from out west, where these are referred to as hydrographs, these plots. And on the top, what they really show is with time on the horizontal axis, and then the volume of water moving through that one particular site on the y-axis, it shows that over time, the water rises. In that top image, it peaks out at just under 60 cubic feet per, I guess they're using units of liters per second or something. But it peaks out at just under 60. And then over time, it starts to drop, right? So this is just the river coming up and then slowly dropping back down. And what we see in that middle plot is that we see both the water coming into this site in the solid line and the water leaving the site in the dashed line. And we can see that the water coming in and the water leaving are just about the same, meaning that that water just comes in, it flows through, and it flows out, right? And that's with no wood in the system. And then in the bottom panel, you see the same measurements, but this time this stream has wood in the channel. And what we see is that the water comes in, but it takes a while for the water to move out. And that peak of the water moving out, again, showed by the dotted line, doesn't rise quite as high as it did before the wood was in there. So this just shows that adding wood to streams can cause these streams, help these streams to hold on to that water. The floodplains can hold on to that water and really reduce the amount of flow that's moving downstream. And it really spreads that water out over time. So this all helps reduce flooding downstream. So if we think of all the small tributaries in our headwaters, if we can add wood to all these tributaries and get them all to hold water, the flood flows down lower in the valley settings in our villages and towns, it can be reduced. So this is really a flood resiliency practice as well. Another very important role is, of course, that, is the role of trapping small organic matter, whether it's leaf pack or bark, any organic material, because that organic material, particularly in these cold water streams that are shaded from the sun, so you don't get really any primary production. We don't have green vegetation growing in these streams. The organic material that falls into the water from the surrounding trees is the base of the food chain. So the leaves fall in, the bugs eat the leaves, and the fish eat the bugs, and then it just, cascades upward from there. So super, super critical. And if you don't have big obstructions like large wood in the streams, all of that organic material just gets flushed down at any sort of high flow. Then there's this function of forcing the water downward into the stream bed, referred to as the hypereic zone. That image on the left shows the stream channel, and then the hypereic zone below. Hypereic really literally means river below. So when you have wood blocking up water, as it is in that right image, if you look in that image to the right, the water's flowing from your right to your left, and there's a big jam in the middle causing a big backwater pool. And when you pond water like that, the weight of the water itself, because that water gets so deep, the weight of the water itself forces those lower layers of water slowly to infiltrate into the hypereic zone. And that hypereic zone, because it's sands and gravels and there's all kinds of biologic life down there, a lot of that is what's referred to as biofilms. This life, fungus and microbacteria, microorganisms that process the nutrients in the water. So that pushing that water down in the hyporheic zone is really important for water quality from a nutrient perspective. It really helps to process those nutrients, convert them into molecules that aren't, feeding things like harmful algal blooms, et cetera. So very important. Also very important because when that water gets pushed in the hyporheic zone, it stays cold. And it moves downstream through that hyporheic zone, and it'll come back into the river at some point, as shown in that middle image. It gets pushed down, but then it comes back up. And when it comes back up very cold. And these cold upwellings that fisheries biologists talk about a lot, where, the cold water fishes will flock to these areas of these cold upwellings during times when the water elsewhere is warmer than they like it to be. So very important from that perspective as well. There's this other thing about reversing the role of wood in reversing the channel evolution process. And the channel evolution process is really this negative process from many perspectives of channels getting deeper. I'll walk you through this. So that's in that image, the stage 1 image is a river that's in healthy condition. It's connected to its floodplain, meaning that the channel's not too deep. It's not a gully. But then for whatever reason, there's many different causes, and we could walk through those if we had more time, but channels can become what's referred to as incised. They cut downward, they erode downward, essentially turning into gullies. And then those gullies eventually widen out. And throughout this whole process, we lose a lot of material. There's a lot of instability. We send a lot of gravels downstream where it causes problems. So it's really seen as a negative consequence. It separates the water from the floodplain. So in this image, we can see this is from a project that TNC hired Red Start to do for us in one of our natural areas. And we're looking upstream. This is Cobb Brook down in Windham, and we're looking upstream at a big jam. And what we see, what I want to highlight is downstream of that jam, how deep that channel is right now, shown by that yellow line. And H1 is just the height of the banks, from the bed up to the top of the bank. It's a very deep channel. It's much deeper and larger than would be expected based upon the land area that's contributing water to it. This is a headwater stream. It really should only be about, 5 feet wide and a foot deep. And it's more like 3.5, 4 foot, if, not 4.5 feet deep at this point. But if you look at that log jam has trapped a sediment up on the upstream side of it, probably for 100 to 150 feet in the upstream direction. And if we were to stand up there, we'd see a channel that had a very much lower bank height, right? The channel's really well connected to the surrounding floodplain. So when the flow comes up, it can spread out onto the floodplain, it slows down, it gets trapped by the trees and depressions, all those things that I mentioned before, those benefits of having water engage the floodplain. And this is really what we want. It really takes the energy out of the water and helps to maintain the stability of the channel and hold nutrients and all of those things that I mentioned before. So this is what wood jams can really do. They can really reverse this channel evolution process in a very positive way. So this is a really valuable aspect or function of large wood. And on this project, we saw this happen. It probably happened 10 to 13 different locations. We had this really incised channel filling up because of the wood that we added to it. And that was after the July floods. It was the July flood that really mobilized. So I think an important point of that is that if you have the structure in place, i.e. the wood, flood events actually can become positive restorative events for river systems. And I think that's something we have long forgotten because we have manipulated our rivers so much that they don't function the way that they did prior to that. This is another important role. This is the same project. You can see all the wood there. We are looking in the downstream direction from a drone. We're looking down at a big lobe of sediment that has been trapped by all of this wood. And the water gets sent in all these different directions, forming all these different small channels. And from a biological perspective, this is really a beneficial outcome. The importance of small multi-thread channels has been shown through scientific investigation to be really greater than these single thread channels that we currently have. This is really a return to the pre-European settlement condition. So this is super important. One thing to think about is, like, imagine all of that sediment moving downstream to the next town or village or culvert. The wood is really helping to trap and hold the sediment in these headwater streams and reduce downstream, flood damages associated with large loads of sediment coming down into our valley bottoms. This is a couple of images showing the work that Judd Kratzer, he's there in the bottom middle image. He's probing the depth of the sediment with a piece of rebar, and then they're measuring the size of a bar there with a tape. You can see that. And they use this methodology to estimate the volume of sediment that they were trapping at all of their wood jams that they've built. And what they came up with is in the table on the right. So per each structure that they assess, they an average of 9.9 cubic yards. And if you look at the number of structures they put in per mile and then calculate the volume, on a mileage basis, they are trapping 422 cubic yards of sediment per mile. And over the total sediment load of this project, and I apologize, I didn't grab the size of this project, but they're trapping 15,000 cubic yards, which is an equivalent of 1,493 dump truck loads. So the power of wood in trapping sediment is super important. And of course, attached to a lot of these fine sediments are the nutrients that we are so desperately trying to keep out of our lakes and ponds to prevent the harmful algal blooms. So this is really a significant water quality strategy. This slide shows the percentage of, the percent of the different functions as measured at 764 structures by the Fish and Wildlife Department. Providing overhead cover for critters to protect them from predation, but from birds, and as I mentioned earlier, is the big one. Retaining sediments and retaining those organic materials are two other big ones that the wood functions. And then followed by narrowing of the channel, which is helpful because it maintains deeper water during low flow times. And scouring pools are also a couple big ones. So just a breakout of how those functions, how often those functions are performed by wood across the different structures. So really quickly, I'm going to try to leave, at least 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to move quickly here. Assessing site suitability for wood addition projects. So the first big things are the slope. I'm sorry, the first big thing is the amount of wood already in the system. The aerial image there showing different debris jams. I'm just trying to convey the idea that, if we have a lot of wood in the system, we don't need to go and add more wood. We know how much wood is supposed to be in these systems through a lot of different studies. This chart on the right shows the amount of wood depending on the channel width. So if you have a channel width of 20 feet, that's right in the middle of the bottom axis. And you draw a line straight up to that yellow line, which is the target wood loading rate. You hit somewhere about, that's about 8 pieces of large wood per 100 feet of stream length. So we can assess these rivers and determine whether the amount of wood is appropriate or not. That's the first parameter we look at in assessing site suitability. The other is channel slope and width. This chart is a little confusing. I'm not going to take the time given how little time I have, but basically the wider the channel, the flatter it needs to be. And this is all about holding wood, right? The bigger the channel and the steeper it is, the more powerful it's going to be and the less likely the wood is going to stick in place. So we know what these dimensions should be. This image on the right shows a stream that's a great candidate for wood addition. We see that it's holding natural wood well, and that wood is performing a good function in scouring the pool. So again, slope and channel is an important parameter to look at. I'm going to skip this slide just due to time. The riparian forest condition, Dave mentioned this, touched on this a little bit, but from left to right here, really thin forest cover. grading to higher forest cover, stocking density in the riparian zone. We need areas with a high stocking density to have enough wood to both add the structures that we need to add, or the jams, as well as not depleting that buffer, not losing that overhead canopy and the other functions that the riparian wood, the standing trees, perform. So that's another consideration. Tree size, length, and diameter. The image on the left is the structure that we built. In the middle is that structure a couple of years later. And then on the top right is just a close-up. You can see that those trees have just been sheared right off. Those trees were nice and long, but they were too small in diameter to withstand the forces. So tree size that you have on the riparian, in the riparian buffer, is also important consideration. Proximity to downstream infrastructure. We don't want to be clogging bridges and culverts. So we pay attention to how far up or how far downstream that infrastructure is. We have guidelines for that. We look to see if we have large boulders or bedrock downstream pinch points or sharp bends in the stream that will trap the large wood before it moves downstream to any infrastructure. And we also build these really large structures referred to as strainers, these monster structures that'll trap any wood. We build those at the downstream end of the project, 1, 2, or 3 of these things that we are really comfortable won't move, to trap any wood from upstream that might be coming down. So we mitigate the risk associated with impacts to downstream infrastructure. Anchoring techniques, I'm going to fly through this. The image on the right shows how you pin logs or wedge logs between standing trees to prevent them from rotating. The photo shows that. You can see the 2 trees standing with the down tree wedged in between those. That's an anchoring technique. Spearing and ballast. So we sharpen the tips of some of these logs that we put on the bed, and we pull them into the bank using an oversized come along, referred to as a grip hoist. We use large rocks and we lever those onto or on the downstream side of these logs to hold them in place. So these are just different anchoring techniques that we use. And then just some example structures. I'm sure folks are interested. What does this stuff actually look like? So here are some channel edge structures. They're protruding about, 1/3 to a half of the way across the channel. You can see the one on the left and the one on the right, they both have gravel bars that have formed as a result of their presence. In the middle, there's a deep pool that has formed as a result of that wood jam. So these are some of these habitat features, holding sediments, serving those functions. And we have channel spanning structures that go all the way across the channel. They perform a lot of functions as well. They can actually do a better job of actually holding enough material to actually raise the bed, as I talked about earlier, and actually fill the channel in when we have those really incised channels and we want to elevate the channel bed. Big scour pools as shown on the left and the right as well. So these are channel spanning structures. They go across the entire channel. I just want to step back really quickly. There is a long history, as I mentioned right at the beginning. There's a lot of guidelines. Vermont now has a guideline that Judd Kratzer developed, and the department have developed. USDA in Vermont has guidelines. They've helped to fund wood addition. So this is a practice that has a history, has been tested, and we understand well. So it's not something that's so new that I wouldn't consider it experimental anymore at this point. Permitting, Army Corps of Engineers and Vermont DEC stream alteration programs are the place to go when we need permits for these. Dave mentioned permitting earlier. It might be that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or Wetlands needs to get involved from time to time, but these are the 2 places that we go to first, and then they let us know if we need other permits. Wood additions in Vermont, again, a little bit of a history. The organizations that have been doing wood additions: the Forest Service, Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, Trout Unlimited, Red Start, private foresters. The land ownership you can see there. I really guessed at the number of projects, so please don't take these with any certainty. My best guess is that we have about 50, 65, 70 projects that have been completed across the state by these different entities. We've been doing this, the Forest Service has probably been doing this the longest, going back 20 years, Fish and Wildlife 10 years, Trout Unlimited probably about 10 years, and Red Start I think's been in this game for about 6 years or so. So that's the practitioners that are out there, the projects that have been done. Different couple, I'm just going to go end with this slide. I think, the different ways that we fund and different people that can do these projects, but the landowners are always the key. Then we need project managers and planners, and what we're trying to build out is this model where the foresters really play a big role as project managers and planners. And then there's a funding applicant, because a lot of, like, if we use DEC water quality funding, that has to go to a nonprofit. So there are these watershed organizations or conservation districts that can apply for that funding. And we're envisioning these folks working hand in hand with the foresters to make these projects happen. Funding, as I mentioned, in this case, I'm thinking of the DEC water quality funding. And then we know, logging companies, maybe the foresters has a logging wing in its company too, but it's really loggers that we want to try to build up the capacity of loggers to do these installs, as Dave mentioned, not as part of logging jobs, but as part of river restoration projects. So that's kind of the model that we're working with now. NRCS EQIP program also funds these projects. And I think I am going to cut it off there because we only have 9 minutes left, and I do want to leave room for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Shayne, for such a great presentation. And you covered a lot of ground. And so thank you so much for sharing all that information. And thank you, Dave, for your introductory kind of presentation and sharing the context of the Vermont Acceptable Management Practices. All really great information. Folks, we do have a few minutes for questions. So I would encourage you to go ahead and either unmute yourself, raise your hand maybe to keep it a little bit organized. Or go ahead and put your question in the chat box. So we do have a few minutes. While folks are thinking of their questions, I do want to kind of circle back around to both Dave and Shayne. This question around kind of how might a landowner get started, recognizing that, Shayne, I appreciate your point, although this isn't a new practice, it's not something that probably every landowner can go out and get started with, on their own. So how might you recommend a landowner who is interested in exploring this further on their property? How might you recommend them that they get started?
Yeah, I really wanted to, at the end there with those few slides, show that, there really are few practitioners doing this work currently. Red Start Incorporated is a forestry company that's doing this work. Trout Unlimited is a nonprofit doing this work. And I think, contacting Trout Unlimited, contacting Red Start, if you have a forester, talking to your forester, contacting, if you want to contact me at the Nature Conservancy, or I'm sure Dave would field calls, at the department, and we can work with landowners to try to figure out how to get projects moving. We are really, the practice, how to do this work on the ground is well understood, but building out the business model the service providers, that's where we are right now. And of course, landowner interest is a big part of that, right? You need to create this the demand to create the supply, and we need to create the supply to create, we're in this sort of catch-22 right now. So I'd say reach out to, one of us, and we can work with you on that, but we are trying to build things out.
Yeah, I just add to that the NRCS does this practice, or this is an accepted NRCS practice. I think they're trying to make it a little more economically feasible, like New Hampshire. It is in New Hampshire. It's a little bit easier to do through NRCS, but that takes time. But feel free to contact us, and we can set you up with folks who would have the latest and greatest information on, what the funding rates are and the best way to go about it. So, and I think like Shayne said, it's the chicken and the egg thing. what comes first. It's certainly growing, and certainly people know more about it. That's why, I get lots of questions, and Kate was getting lots of questions. That's why we're, putting this information out there. And so it's yeah, just give us a call, and we'll connect on it. So
Great. Yeah, thanks, Dave. And I did put both your email addresses in the chat box, so folks have a way to connect with you. And I'll throw my hat in the ring, in terms of happy to help if folks have questions. But Shayne, I really like what you said about connecting with your consulting forester. I think that's a really important component, I think, of this whole conversation. As you mentioned, and Dave mentioned, there's an assessment component, right? An inventory component to sort of first assess the health of your streams and the need for additional strategic woody additions or strategic wood additions. So I would recommend folks, if you're interested and you haven't talked to your consulting forester, that's also, another great way to, start thinking about whether or not this practice is appropriate for your land. Or land that you manage. So there is a question in the chat box from Mark, a question about about beaver analogs and their relation or connection to this work. Shayne, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts on that. Too many to articulate in the time we have. But beaver dam analogs, very similar idea, very similar function. It's a woody obstruction in the stream. It plays a lot of the same roles. Typically, beaver dams show up in slightly different environments than where we, typically think of, high elevation, steep trout streams, which is more we're doing the wood addition, these forested settings. Once you get out of that forested setting and the streams lose their slope and the valley widens up, typically these obstructions are going to be in the form of beaver dams in a natural circumstance. So another restoration activity in those specific settings is to come in and build sort of artificial beaver dams. So very closely related. Yeah. So I can address, I was going to mention there's a question about whether we're doing continuing education for licensed foresters, and Dave and myself and others at the department and TNC are working on that. We want to train foresters, teach them how to get these projects going, and do the planning that's required. We put in a funding proposal to the U.S. Forest Service. Unfortunately, we didn't get that, but we have that proposal, and we're looking for other sources for that proposal. Really build the capacity of the foresters to plan and design these projects, and then build the capacity of the loggers to actually construct the projects.
Yeah, I could see this being a good topic of a LEAP workshop, or getting loggers, and we've been starting to, because of forester licensing, offer continuing ed credits for foresters for our logger workshops, and I think it would be good for both loggers and foresters. And part of it is the identifying, part of it is where does the funding come from, and then it's just getting the word out there. So yeah, that's a great recommendation or question.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mike, for that question. Any other questions from folks? I want to give folks an opportunity to unmute and ask a question if they have one.
Kate, I have a question that I'm wondering how small, like many of the pictures that we saw, Shayne, were very large streams relative to, my woodland and most folks' headwater streams. How small a stream is this practice viable for? Like, is it for a 5 and 6 foot stream, or is it only those 16 to, foot wide streams and larger?
Yeah, Dave, I think it goes, it goes to the smallest streams we have. And it even goes smaller, right? Like I feel like I heard at the annual meeting, the VWA annual meeting, the fellow from UNH Extension talking about putting wood on the forest floor. So we have a lack of downwood on the forest floor, our smallest streams, our wetlands, our larger streams. So it's really applicable to all streams. And at some point, and I'd love to see this happen, I don't know if it ever will. I know the permitting issues, I hesitate to even mention it, but I'd love for this to become a practice that, school groups could do, kids could go out and do with their teachers and others. And I know that makes some people nervous, but in some respects, these small streams are so simple that I think we could do a lot of it without doing any harm. And so yeah, I think it everywhere.
Okay.
That's great.
Do you have any other questions, Kate? I have one more question to ask.
Yeah, let's let you ask it, Dave.
Okay. So Shayne, with the AMPs and my 25 years in forestry, more than that actually, but it seems like one of the reasons that we are concerned about leaving logging slash and logging debris in streams is that we don't want the water that's traveling down a channel to go out and create another channel, which would release a bunch of organic soil and finer soil and start a new flood channel or stream channel. And is that just wrong? I mean, is that a bad information, or is it does it only happen during flood events, and therefore it's limited in its degree of soil movement? Does that question make any sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And, I think it's a fact that because we've stripped so many obstructions from the stream channels and the forest floor, that, once water gets rolling, it carves these new channels, and it can have a huge impact, right? But so we need to get back to a place where we have obstructions on the forest floor, in the channels, and we can get back to these multi-thread channels, because what the science has really showed, and it's not everywhere, some of these steeper headwater streams were single thread channels by and large, but they did jump around. And this process of channel avulsion, which is the creation of a new channel, was a dominant process on the landscape. And certainly in these lower gradient streams, you had just these many, many, many small channels with very little power. We really had, more like I said earlier, just series of wetlands. So it's hard to get back to that condition. We do want to fill the channel. We want to get the water on the floodplain, but we also need the floodplain to be intact with woody obstructions or roughness, that it can withstand that water without so many channels being carved. Here, and again, it's just the rate, the timing, right? The amount. It's that same issue,
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I've got a question. I noticed on one of the first slides that Dave showed it was sure a really substantial logging road, and I don't know if they were using current use, but I gathered that current use didn't really allow that. So does anybody know anything about that one?
I'm not sure which slide you're referring to, but current use doesn't have any restrictions on your roads that you can have in your forest. Just how the roads are maintained and constructed so that they are water quality friendly, so to speak. You can have a large road as long as it's has ditches that are cross drained properly and stream crossings that are large enough. And I know some of the photos I had in my slides were on FPR land, so they were larger acreages, which require more truck roads to get farther back in the forest, so than typical UVA parcels. But yeah, the AMPs talk about roads and trails and maintenance of those two structure, those two things. And yeah, UVA doesn't say that you can't have a road, just says it has to be built and maintained properly. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sue. And Jay, looks like you have a question in the chat box. Do you want to go ahead and ask that, or do you want me to read it out? I want to give you an opportunity if you want to. Looks like you're on mute. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious about for a smaller stream where there already are fairly large trees, sort of like matchsticks kind of tumbled across various sections at various angles, but really the surface of the stream wouldn't really come into play until maybe there was a biblical rain and the headwater got blasting along. And is there some sort of strategy or just leave them alone type of approach? That was more or less what I was curious about.
Yeah. Thanks, Jay. And before I say anything else, I want to be clear that like anything that we do, needs to be permitted, as mentioned previously, and be compliant with AMPs. But to your question, if we have a permit to do a restoration project and we have a lot of trees that are bridging, we often refer to that as bridging the channel. That's one of the easiest ways to get wood in, right? Just put a saw into those trees and let them come in. We strategically try to do it in a way that's going to maintain the greatest length of that stem so that it's going to anchor and stay in place, right? We're always trying to make sure that things are anchoring well. So we do that. But yeah, that is a common technique. I want to add that, in these systems, it's not just what we're learning is that it's not just standing wood on the banks. It's not just dead wood in the channel, but it's dead wood over the channel, right? It's maybe leaning wood over the channel. It's wood about to fall. We need different age classes and different age of decay, like so that we have continuous fall into the stream. You know what I'm saying? So we might go and drop a few of those bridging stems in, but then we might leave a bunch and say, you know what, in 15 years, this thing's going to come into the stream. And that's great because we want continuous to fall. But no, that's a really great question. It's a really great question. It's something we've just really started thinking about. So yeah, it's a good question.
Great.
Yeah,
Well,
I like to. Oh, sorry. I just have to add. I like to think of it as like a conveyor belt of when we talk about coarse woody debris or coarse woody material, and not having it all cut down today and expecting it to last forever. But you need some on the ground now. You need some that are girdled or weak, or at least left there so that they can fall. And then you need, trees in the future that are healthy now that aren't going to be in 50 years. So it's always a cycle. The woods are always changing, and brush disappears and more reappears. So that's great discussion.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank both Dave and Shayne for your time today, and appreciate you sharing. Obviously, there's still a lot of conversation happening about what this looks like and how we move forward, as a forestry community. So that's the work of UWA. We're here to help, and we're also here to continue to provide these educational programs. Speaking of which, we have a woods walk. If you're interested in getting out in the woods and actually exploring some of these practices, I know Dave and Jeremy Mears, I think it is, with the U.S. Forest Service, will be hosting a woods walk on June 8th, as Dave mentioned earlier. I believe the time, it sounds like, Dave, the time has changed from 9 to 12.
We think it's going to take more than 2 hours.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like you have a lot of projects to cover and a lot of ground to cover. So yeah, so just wanted to highlight that as an opportunity to get out and actually see some of these projects up close. If you haven't been on one of our wood walks in the past, these are just really great opportunities to get out in the field with folks who are experienced in different topics, and really get up close and be able to sort of see some of this work in action. So that's our next woods walk. Again, that's Saturday, June 8th. Our climate series is continuing, and we have a whole bunch of different programs coming together for the summer. webinar, but our next topic for our climate series will be focusing on wood turtles. For those of you who are not aware, wood turtles are a species of concern in Vermont and throughout New England. And there were some recent recommendations for forest landowners that were released. So we'll have Kylie Briggs, who will be sharing a presentation via a webinar on June 17th. And then we'll have an opportunity to get out in the field with him to look at wood turtle friendly forest management and get a better look at some of the wood turtle habitat. So those are some upcoming opportunities. Feel free to check out the rest of our climate series. You can find it on our website at vtwoodlands.org under the landowner manager tab at the top. There's a website for our climate series. So again, feel free to check that out. And again, thank you so much to Shayne and Dave for joining us today and sharing this great information. And thanks to all of our participants for taking the time to connect with us today. And so with that, it looks like I know it's a beautiful day out there. I know it's pretty warm, but I hope everybody gets a chance to get out in the woods and find some shade today. So thanks everybody for joining us and look forward to seeing you at future programs.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kate.